Soup season truly is upon us. This is my second soup season cooking class. And I'm very excited to show you some recipes that I have really been enjoying this soup season. I know I talked to a few of our members in Illinois today, and they told me that they are having their first snow. So I think that it's very fitting. I know today in Pennsylvania it was rainy and dreary. I feel like it's a perfect start to soup season. I have three really delicious soup recipes for you. And then I'm also going to show you how to make some stock as just a bonus recipe. I know we have some friends cooking along, so I'll stop and pause. However, if you have not been to a cooking class previously, welcome. Just some housekeeping reminders. We are recording tonight just so that our friends who couldn't make it can watch this. Also, if you can, just please keep yourself muted unless you're interjecting to ask a question. You can also put your questions in the chat, and my lovely co-host Gail will bring them to my attention. However, otherwise, just trying to remain muted. Mostly that's for me because I have my headphones in just so there's no background noise for myself or others. But otherwise, that's really it. We'll use the chat to communicate for anything you need. And Gail will also be posting all of the recipes in the chat. You can find them all at uniteforher.org/food for thought. And so if you're wondering, what is food for thought? Food for thought is a moment that we have at the beginning of every single one of our cooking classes in which we dive into the nutrition of a different plant food. We all usually know that these plant foods are so nutrient dense, but we don't always know what about them makes them so nutrient dense, right? Or why do we want to consume more of them? So today's food for thought presented to you by Merck is the sweet potato. I know we're heading into the holiday season, so I feel like the sweet potato is something that is a star of many people's plates, side dishes, etc. I know my colleague Michelle is doing Celebrate the Sides and she's using sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are a phenomenal source of antioxidants. So they come in three different varieties: orange in the inside, white or purple. Depending on the different color, they're going to have different antioxidant nutrients. No matter which type of sweet potato you get, they're going to be a rich source of fiber. So they're going to be a source of both soluble and insoluble fiber. These fibers help with a wide variety of GI functions, and actually getting a good balance of both soluble and insoluble fiber has been shown to have protective properties against colon cancer. In general, it's also going to help support a healthy gut microbiome. So it's going to support the good bacteria in our gut. They contain what's called prebiotic fiber. You maybe have heard probiotics before. That's the good bacteria we want in our gut. Prebiotics are the food for the good bacteria. Now, this is an orange sweet potato, but purple sweet potatoes are rich in a pigment called anthocyanin. Orange are rich in a pigment called beta carotene. Both of those pigments have been shown to be protective of eye health and to decrease eye cell damage overall. So they're really helping to promote eye health, but also cell health in general, thinking those antioxidant nutrients, they're going to help with the combat oxidative stress in our cells. So however you choose to consume sweet potatoes, and whether it is white or orange or purple, know that you're getting plenty of nutrients from it. We're going to put this to the side. I'm going to use it in a little bit. And so I'll set the stage here right now. First and foremost, I wanted to show you our vegetable stock recipe. So like I mentioned, this is kind of a bonus recipe. So the vegetable stock actually takes a good bit to cook. It takes about an hour. And I don't want everybody to kind of have to sit around and wait afterwards to see it, but I will show you the difference of what it looks like now versus the end of class. And we'll let it kind of cook on and linger for a little bit afterwards. So let me show you what I have here. I have a nice big stock pot. I'll bring this over and around. Kind of difficult to see. However, in my stock pot, I have about 12 cups of water. And then I have a bunch of different veggies. I have 2 stalks of celery. I have 4 carrots. I have the tops of a leek. And I also have 2 onions, as well as some fresh parsley, some fresh thyme, peppercorns, and a little bit of salt, and just a few bay leaves. I say all that, but with vegetable stock, it can really be flexible. What I love to do is I love to kind of save, let's say, like tops of carrots or skins of sweet potatoes, things like that. I'll put them in a bag in the freezer. And once I get about 4, 5, 6 cups of frozen vegetable scraps, I'll put them in a pot with 10 to 12 cups of water, the peppercorns, the herbs, the spices. And then I'm just going to cook all this over the stove for about an hour. The longer you can do it, the better. It'll start to get a little bit more flavor. However, if you keep cooking and cooking and cooking and cooking, eventually it'll start to evaporate. So typically my recommendation is about an hour to 2 hours or so. I'm going to put the top on here and let's go ahead. I'm just going to put this right away on low. You can bring it to a boil and then drop it down to low. But since we're going to be kind of coming back to it later, we're just going to start on low and stay on low. Also, again, another reminder, if you can just keep muted if you're not asking a question. Again, this is just helpful with the background noise. So thank you very much, everybody, for that. And again, that vegetable stock is really just a bonus recipe. So I'll show you at the end what it looks like. I put in mostly water. So if you think it's clear, right, that's the color of it. I want you to keep that in mind as we circle to the end of class and I show you the color of what it looks like afterwards. You can make stock out of a lot of different things. People will make chicken stock or beef stock or kind of a combination of multiple different things together. So I think it's a great way to really have a little bit more control over what's going into your soups. Now, our next recipe is going to be our sheet pan squash soup recipe. Say that 10 times fast. Now, I love squash.
Sorry, there's one question before you move on.
Yeah.
Marta asked about people putting whole peppercorns in stocks and what do they do for the flavor?
Ooh, so peppercorns add a really nice, like sharp pepper flavor. However, then you won't have all the pepper flakes in it. The salt will dissolve, but the pepper isn't going to dissolve in the same way. So the peppercorns add that peppery flavor without leaving us with that grit of the pepper in there. I can show you. These are my peppercorns. So I just use about like 2 tablespoons or so of peppercorns. Good question. Anything else? Awesome. Okay. And Gail, feel free to mute anybody if you need to.
Okay.
Also. And so we'll move on to the sheet pan squash recipe. So I have about 2 butternut squash on a sheet pan here. I'm showing you this. I did this preemptively. I did not chop all of this butternut squash. So I actually went to the store today and they were having a sale on the pre-chopped butternut squash. And I thought, why spend all the time chopping it when I could get this pre-chopped squash? So I'm all about convenience for myself and for you. A lot of times people will ask about like pre-cut and pre-chopped vegetables. I think they're a great way to make things more accessible. And something like now, great because it was on sale. And so I got it for cheaper than a butternut squash, which can be really daunting. Again, this is butternut squash, about 4 or so cups, 2 or so medium butternut squash size. I would have traditionally peeled them and chopped them up into some nice wedges and put them on the pan here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put on a tablespoon of olive oil and a tablespoon of maple syrup. Now, while I do that, you can also use a different type of squash. So I know, for example, I want to say a couple weeks ago, in our Lancaster Farm Fresh CSA share, there was a kaboka squash, which is kind of like a green pumpkin, if you could equate it to that. And so with that kaboka squash, you can do the same thing. Peel it, chop it up, put it onto a pan, just like butternut squash, and then you would blend it up. It's a nice sweet flavor. I kind of love experimenting with the different winter squash because I feel like they all have a little bit of a different kind of like sweet profile to them. So I put 1 tablespoon of each of olive oil and maple syrup, and then I'm just going to sprinkle on a little bit of salt. And then if you've ever been on a cooking class with me before, you know that I don't mind making a mess. So I'm actually just going to use my hands and mix this all together just because I really want to make sure everything's well incorporated. And so what we're going to do, I have my oven preheated to 400 already. And I'm going to put this into the oven for, I'm going to say about 30 to 40 minutes. The recipe says about 40 minutes. I'm all about flexibility, right? If you look in the oven and the recipe said 40 minutes and at 20 minutes, it looks really well cooked, please feel free to take it out. This will probably cook a little bit faster because it is so finely chopped. The recipe just calls for large wedges of the butternut squash, but this is nice and small. So the smaller something is, if you're not familiar with that, the quicker it will cook in the oven. All right, so I'm gonna pop this in and then I'll set a timer for about like 30 minutes and we can kind of check on it then.
There's a question, Aubrey, about what could be used instead of maple syrup for someone who's diabetic.
Oh, good question. I would say, truthfully, you can omit the maple syrup. The butternut squash is going to be sweet in and of itself. We're also about to put in a little bit of apple, which is going to add some sweetness. If you wanted to use like a 0 calorie or a 0 sugar sweetener, you could use something like, typically my recommendation in that area is more of a stevia or a monk fruit. But I would say largely you could just omit it, and I think it would still be plenty sweet and delicious without it. Good question.
Also, what degree do you have the oven set for?
I have it set at 400.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay, okay. All right. So I have an apple here. To be honest, I couldn't even tell you what kind of apple this is. I think I got a Gala apple. And so I'm chopping it just into some large chunks. What we're going to do is we're going to put it onto our sheet pan. So I'm just tossing this in the trash over here. And we're going to toss it with some onion on the sheet pan. I did pre-chop the onion. It was a strong onion. My eyes were watering after that. So I do have to chop an onion later. So I might be tapping on Gail if I start shedding some tears in that moment. So I'm just cutting it into nice big pieces. We're going to pop these in the oven as well. And again, this adds some nice sweetness to the recipe too. All right, perfect. So I have a sheet pan over here. I love to have them pre-prepped. So I'll put the apples on. And then I have my onions in my bowl here. Just one like medium onion. I sliced it into some wedges. All right, and then I have some garlic. We're blending this soup in the end. So I'm actually just gonna put the garlic on whole. So I'm just chopping the end off here. I'll give it a little crush so that I can get the skin off easier. And then I'm just gonna pop them on whole. Perfect. All right, and I'll toss this in the trash. And then we're just gonna drizzle on a little bit of olive oil. I'm pretty flexible when it comes to a drizzle or a sprinkle. I think cooking should be fun and should be flexible, right? You should be able to make changes and you should be able to miss an ingredient or add an ingredient, and it's totally okay. So you might hear me say like drizzle or sprinkle a few times. You know, there are definitely specific measurements in the recipe too. I would say about a tablespoon of olive oil, maybe about a quarter teaspoon of salt, quarter teaspoon of pepper, if you're more of a measurer, because I know sometimes it's helpful to just have those specifics. Same deal. I am going to toss this with my hands. And then I'm going to pop this into the oven. This wants to cook for about 30 or so minutes, 30 to 35. But again, same concept. If you look at it and you're thinking, whoa, these are completely done after 15 minutes, absolutely feel free to take them out. What we'll be looking for is for the onion and the apple to start to turn a little bit brown, especially on the edges. The onion will do so a lot. All right, so let me pop this in the oven. And then I'm going to set my timer because if you'll notice, I forgot to set it last time. So 30 minutes. Perfect. So really for the sheet pan squash soup, I don't want to say that's it. That's not it. But that's it for now. We're going to later on pop it in the blender with some seasoning and a little bit of broth, which I have behind it here. And then we're just going to blend it up and that's it. And I love this recipe because I know a lot of times, right? Maybe you get home from a really long day and you don't want to spend a ton of time in the kitchen. Maybe you want to get home, but you want to like run up and take a shower really quick. It's nice because it's kind of a set it and forget it type of recipe, right? It's going to be in the oven for 30 minutes. And then after 30 minutes, all you have to do is blend it and you're done. And it makes a really delicious creamy soup. So I'm excited to show you that. We're going to move on to our red lentil chili next. So I know we have Deborah cooking along for that. So certainly stop me if you need anything, anybody who's watching. But let me pause. Any questions on the sheet pan squash soup before we move into the red lentil chili? All right, perfect. All right, so I have a Dutch oven here. Definitely not necessary. This is an enameled cast iron Dutch oven. So what it means is it's very heavy. It is cast iron and it's coated in a nonstick coating of enamel. It's definitely safe to use, safe at high heat, which is nice, but then it's a lot easier to clean than a cast iron where you're having to like scrub it with salt and water, for example. So what I'm going to do, again, I pre-chopped my onion. I can actually smell it coming out of here. So I'm a little bit fearful for the onion later. However, I have a red bell pepper, a jalapeno, and some garlic. I just had those pre-prepped in advance. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the front burner onto about medium heat. I'll get it as sat on there as I can. It's a little difficult with the big pot in the back. I don't have a huge stove, so we'll let that kind of warm up. What we're going to do is once that warms up, we're going to put our onion and we're going to put our bell pepper in. So let's chop up our bell peppers. Let me take the sticker off here, give it a little rinse. I always think it's a good opportunity to talk about washing your produce because I know, frankly, for a long time, I didn't wash my produce or I would just give it a little rinse, right? And I was like, oh, that's fine. Definitely important to always give all of your produce a good wash, really cool water and a little bit of a scrub for 20, 30 seconds largely can get the job done. But you can also soak your produce in a mixture of water and baking soda or vinegar for something that's maybe a little bit softer, right? Like berries or greens. It just helps to get any dirt and sediment off of it. As well, if you think about, I know all the time I go to the store, I pick up an apple, I look at it, I'm like, not that apple, I want a different one. Think about people kind of touching them all day, right? So it just helps to also kind of cut back on any potential bacteria exposure there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just taking my red bell pepper. Please feel free to use any color bell pepper. But I'm taking it, I'm chopping it into nice long strips. And then I'm going to turn it 90 degrees. And I'm just going to dice it nice and small. So you may, during cooking classes, hear us use a lot of different words. Chop, dice, mince, and you're thinking, Aubrey, what the heck does that mean? All the different chops typically associate with a different size. So whether it's a half of an inch or a quarter of an inch, they're all a little bit different. If you're curious, right, a little bit more of the specifics, we do have a very robust library in which we have a segment called Back to Basics, where we talk about these different kitchen techniques like chopping, dicing, mincing, for example. And what does that mean? What's the size of those specific measurements? All right, so I have my diced bell pepper. Really, the ultimate goal is for it to just be the same size as the onion. So if you're somebody who likes a really chunky soup, you like a really big piece in there, then with that, you could absolutely chunk them a little bit larger, maybe more of a chop than a dice. And then if you wanted smaller pieces, you could certainly make it even a little bit smaller than this. So let's see. Our pan's definitely starting to feel warm. So I'm going to go ahead and drizzle some olive oil in there. And then I'm going to put in the onion. It's giving me a nice sizzle to show me that it's warmed up. And then I'm going to put in our bell pepper. And you just want to cook this until it starts to become, the onion specifically, translucent, which means see-through. And so that typically takes around 4 to 5 minutes. But again, flexibility is important. So if you feel like after 4 to 5 minutes, they're still not really translucent, totally okay, keep cooking it. Same thing the opposite way. If they start to cook really quickly, you can just move on to the next step sooner. All right, perfect. So I'll let that kind of cook for just a moment. While that cooks down, I'm going to chop up my jalapeno. I'd say this is optional, right? If you are more spice intolerant,
good guy,
you don't love spice very much, you could definitely omit this jalapeno pepper. Or if you love spice, you could put even extra. The recipe calls for about a quarter, half of the jalapeno pepper, but I'm going to use the whole pepper because I know I'm not going to use the rest of the pepper another time, and I don't want it to go to waste. And also, we love spice in our household. So same kind of concept as the bell pepper. I'm taking my pepper, I'm slicing it nice and thin. I'm making it even smaller because with jalapeno, you don't necessarily want a huge, huge bite of it. So I'm taking it in nice thin strips. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn it at 90 degrees. And then I'm just going to give it a nice little dice. This is a fine dice, you could say. Maybe more of a coarse dice with the bell pepper and the onion. All right, perfect. And then I have some garlic that I already pre-minced just because I don't know why. I feel like garlic for me takes forever to mince. So if anybody has some tips on how they love to mince garlic quickly, I'd love to hear it. I used to use a garlic press for those of you who are familiar, but I just hate cleaning it, quite frankly. So I pre-minced the garlic. You can also feel free. I know that there's so many useful resources now. There's like garlic paste, for example, or pre-minced garlic you can get in a jar. It's so nice to tap into those resources. So cooking doesn't feel as daunting, right? I think it's all our dietitian team is all about making cooking easy and accessible. So I'm all for making these substitutions and swaps that make your life a little bit easier. All right, let's give this a little stir here. Onion and pepper are looking great, quite frankly. They are looking pretty translucent, actually, which is wonderful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to toss in this jalapeno.
Aubrey, someone was commenting that they microplane
Yes.
their garlic,
Ooh,
which I've never thought of.
So smart. I'll have to try that during my next cooking class. I feel like I always see it around the holiday time, those like little garlic, it's not a microplane, but they kind of mash them up for you. You rub the garlic on it and it breaks it apart. So I'm all for an easy hack. So thank you to whoever made that suggestion.
There's also a question on whether the recorded video will be posted or accessible.
Yes, it will. Yep. So typically what we do, while I mix this up, I'll tell you, typically what we do with our cooking classes is we do them for 2 months at a time. So this is November, December is the soup season. Then we'll record one of them. There's 4 of the same cooking classes throughout the entire 2-month span. And then at the end of those 2 months, then usually they'll put one of them onto the library. So it's just uniteforher.org. And you can do /her library. That'll route you to the correct page. Also, if you're on uniteforher.org at the top, there's education and a drop down for video library. That's where you can find all of our historical cooking classes as well. So definitely go on and watch them. I feel like they're kind of just a riot to have on in the background, right? Like while you're doing something else, maybe holiday cooking, listening to this. It's like a cooking show just in the background. So needless to say, long story short, yes, this will be available on the library. All right, so I've got my garlic and my jalapeno in there. So now I'm going to start making some extra additions. So I've got some chili powder. I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons. And if you're thinking with any of these spices, you don't like them, 1 tablespoon of cumin, please feel free to omit something, change it up, do something a little bit different. And then I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of paprika. I actually use paprika in almost every single recipe I realized for this cooking class because paprika is delicious. I'm also going to put in, I have 2 cans, a little difficult to see, but 2 cans of diced fire roasted tomatoes. I'm putting them and all their juices in, but let me pause for 1 second. Let me just give all of this a little mix together to kind of coat the veggies in these spices before I just dump these right in. You want it to be nice and fragrant. Start smelling those spices. All right, perfect. Pour these in. All the juices too, all the liquid can go in as well. If you have just regular diced tomatoes, that works fine too. Or if you're somebody who maybe had a big garden and you have like a bunch of tomatoes left over, regular tomatoes work well too. Give this a nice mix. All right. Perfect. All right, so now I'm going to measure out some stock. So I do have some store-bought vegetable stock that I'm going to use today. So for this, you want about 2 to 3 cups of stock. I say that because you can kind of keep adding, play it by ear as it starts to thicken and you're maybe needing to add a little bit more liquid. I'm going to measure out 2 to begin with. And then I realized I did forgot to put in our tomato paste. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that in too. So 2 cups to start with. I'll probably add more. It usually does thicken up quite a bit. So it kind of depends on your preference, right? If you're somebody who really enjoys a super thick, chunky soup, I would say, maybe you won't need to add extra. If you like your soup and chili to be a little bit thinner, you'll probably need to add extra. This was 3 tablespoons of tomato paste. So where we could have put it in was when we had our jalapeno and just the veggies in here with the spices. Could have put it in then. It's going to do all just the same now. So I'm popping it in and just making sure it's nice and mixed up and coating everything so we don't have a big clump. Great, perfect. And this is so aromatic. I can just like smell all of the spices. I was telling Gail beforehand, I love having it with a little dollop of like sour cream. You put cilantro on it, put a little cheese. You could put avocado. I think there are so many options for topping it that are so delicious. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to put this stock in. And I'm going to leave this over here because we will definitely have to measure some more stock. And I'm just going to kind of let this cook a little bit, come to a boil. I'll bring the heat up just a little bit because I want it to kind of start to simmer together. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add in our red lentils. So for those of you who are not super familiar with lentils, lentils are part of our pulse family, beans, legumes. So these are red lentils. They're actually pretty small. And so they are very nice because they're really delicate. There's a lot of lentils. There's green, there's yellow, there's brown. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to give them a little rinse really quick. And I pre-rinsed them before, but I'm just going to kind of rinse them again. So lentils are a great source of protein and fiber. And I love them because they typically are found dried. However, not like dried beans that take hours to days to soak. You can pretty much use them within 15, 20 minutes. They don't take very long to cook at all. Great. So I gave them a nice little rinse. And so here they are. And so now we're up to a little simmer here. I'm going to toss in my red lentils. Perfect. And I like to give it a good stir for a couple seconds because I feel like the lentils do tend to sometimes have a tendency to stick together. I want them to definitely break apart. So I'm just going to kind of chop this.
Aubrey, how much lentil did you use?
3/4 cup. Thank you for reminding me. 3/4 cup of red lentils. You could use a different type of lentil if you'd like in here, if you just have something else on hand. I'd say just be mindful of how long you need to cook it, right? Taste and test the lentils. You could use the same volume, 3/4 cup for whatever type of lentil. We're going to cook this for about 10 or so minutes, 10 to 15. You just want the lentils to be nice and cooked through. And that's when we're going to add in our beans, our corn, some of our really hearty ingredients. And that's when we're really going to start to see this thicken and we're really going to let those flavors meld together. Great, perfect. Beautiful. So we'll let it simmer for just a bit. Again, about 10 minutes. I'll look at my timer. It looks like we have 15 or so minutes left on our squash inside of the oven. So we'll give that about 10 minutes. At 5 minutes left, we'll check on it. In the interim, I wanted to start prepping for another one of our recipes, which is our Marry Me Tuscan vegetable soup. I'm just going to start prepping and doing a little bit of chopping. So our hero of our food for thought, I have our sweet potato. I also have a leek. You can see I chopped off the tops because I used them for our stock. And then I have the dreaded onion that I mentioned. So we're going to chop these up While I start to chop them, not to put you on the spot, Gail, however, I would love if you wanted to tell everybody. I have my lovely co host, Gail, here. I would love if you would tell everybody a little bit more about what you do at Unite for Her.
Sure thing. So my
Thank
name is
you.
Gail Kelly. I have been with Unite for Her for about 11 years. And I'm the VP of Operations, which I jokingly say is I just sort of do a little bit of everything and try to keep everything moving in the right direction. But yeah, this has been my second career, but really my passion, and so grateful to be able to do something as a job that I also love to do.
It's great. And yeah, Gail does everything. So when she says she does a little bit of everything, she's not lying to you. So if anything needs to be fixed, we're calling Gail. So thank you, Gail, for hopping on tonight. All right, so I'm chopping the onion, and mostly that was in case I started crying from the onion. So I don't know that it's going to happen. This one seems to be less strong than the other one, but I don't want to speak too soon. We also do have how to chop an onion on our Back to Basics library, because I know that I feel like for quite a while,
I need to watch
really,
that one.
I didn't really know how to chop an onion as I like spill the onion all over my table. However, I'll talk a little bit about it. So I chopped the top off of my onion, and what I did is I cut it in half. And so I have my onion half here. I sliced it lengthwise through the middle, but not all the way to the end. The end is the glue that holds it all together. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it 90 degrees, a lot of turning happening. And I'm going to just slice some lines through it, vertical. I'm going to turn it again, 90 degrees. And now I'm going to chop in the opposite direction. So it comes out to small little pieces. All right, perfect. Granted, I don't know what I was doing with onions before I did this, because this makes so much sense. So I'll throw these onion tops away. Really great opportunity, I feel like, with this cooking class to like compost a lot of things if you're a composter. A lot of scraps, a lot of things that you could use for a vegetable stock in the future. So just in keeping that in mind, I'm going to give my chili a little stir. It's bubbling over here. I always like to kind of scrape the bottom. Same thing with the lentils sticking together. I feel like they start to have a tendency to like stick to the bottom. And I turned my heat back to medium just to let it simmer. All right, perfect. About 5 minutes left on that, and then we'll add in the rest. All right, circling back, we have our leek now. So I'm just really going to use the whites for the most part with the leek. These greens, perfect for a stock recipe later on. And I'm going to cut the roots off. I don't necessarily want those. And let me clear off my cutting board. So I will put the onions here on this plate. So we're going to put the onions, the sweet potato, and the leek all in together so we can toss them all on the same plate.
Deborah was suggesting that she puts her diced onion in small plastic bags in the freezer and then takes them out. So to not have to dice as much.
That's really smart. I feel like, especially, you just get all the crying out at once, right? Do them all at once. That's a great idea. All right, with my leek, what I like to do, you can kind of do whatever you'd like with it. I like to chop it in half, and then I kind of just like to slice it long. You could also chop it lengthwise again so that they're quarters of the leek. A leek is part of the allium family, similar to onion and garlic, definitely a much more mild flavor. It's not like sharp like an onion, but it does add a little bit of that kind of oniony kick to it. So I'm turning them into little half moons here. Perfect. And then they just break apart so nicely into these little pieces. On my last cooking demo, I went to the store and they actually didn't have any leeks. I feel like that does happen quite a bit. I go to the store and I don't see any. You could use fennel, you could use celery, really whatever makes sense. In that case, I would say those are two good substitutions for it. All right, and then my sweet potato. So as you can see with my sweet potato, while I chop this here, I'm leaving the skin on. That's because when we leave the skin on with something like a sweet potato, we're going to get a little extra fiber from it. So if you're having issues with, let's say, like GI distress, right? You're having some stomach issues. You want to try to take that skin off because that's where a lot of the fiber comes from. Could cause you a little bit of extra GI disturbance to have that extra fiber. Now, if we take the skin, if we leave the skin on, we've got that extra fiber. If let's say we're in a normal state of stomach, right? We're just trying to add a little fiber to our day. I did give it a nice good scrub beforehand. So same concept of washing your vegetables. You want to give it a scrub. All right, and so I'm just going to chop this up into some nice pieces. So what I did is I cut it in half. And then I always feel like, same with garlic, I feel like it takes a while to cut a sweet potato, but I always like to be pretty specific because I want the sweet potato to cook all the way through. So I like to have nice small pieces, fairly even or as even as I can make them. So I'm chopping these slices in half so that they're a little bit thinner. And then what I'm going to do is same thing like our peppers and like everything else we've been doing tonight. I'm just going to turn them and I'm going to chop them again. And I do want them to be pretty small because if we're thinking this is a soup, right? You don't want a huge bite in there. So just a nice small little bite. This would be another good opportunity to get something pre-chopped. You could also easily substitute this for a regular potato or perhaps a winter squash, like a butternut squash. You could even put a grain in here instead of a sweet potato. You could put like farro, for example. There is some gnocchi in it, so we do have a little bit of another starch in there. I hear my soup bubbling over here, so I'm just going to give it a little stir behind me. And while I finish chopping this up, I'm actually going to go ahead. It's been just about 10 minutes, a little bit less than 10 minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put into my soup. I have over here in waiting, I have some rinsed black beans, pinto beans, and corn, a can of each. I'm going to take these. I'm going to pop them all into the soup. And then what I like to do is I like to turn it to low. I'll cover it. And then I'm just going to let it sit and simmer. That's the key to like a really delicious, thick chili or soup is just sitting and simmering. So I'm looking at this now. It's very, very thick. I do love a thick soup, but I'm going to add just another cup of broth so that it can continue to absorb while it's closed off. So I'll turn this down to low. Let me grab one more cup of broth. Maybe a little extra. There's about 2 cups left in here. If you want to add a little bit more, you can. You can also use water instead. If you're, just thinking, I'm just going to splash a little water and maybe you ran out of your broth, totally fine. We always have the opportunity to add more at the end too. All right, so I'm going to give it one final mix. And then I'm just going to pop that lid on. I would say cook it for about 20, 30 minutes. Really let those flavors meld together. Let the lentils cook. Let everything kind of simmer together. We'll reassess at the end of class and see how things are looking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chop up this last little bit of sweet potato. But before that, let me go ahead. I forgot to get out my last pan, but let me get out my last pan. And we'll go ahead and turn the heat on there to start to get it cooking. So I have just another pot. And unlike a Dutch oven, stainless steel heats up very quickly. So I will go ahead, I'll put this on the heat. I'm going to put it on about medium heat. And then I'm going to try to quickly chop my last bit of the sweet potato.
But carefully.
But carefully, yes. Gail's biting her nails watching me cut the sweet potato. Right. So we're going to chop this up again, same size as the rest. It's ideal to cut them all up very similar in size because same thought with the cooking and size dependent to the butternut squash. If you've got lots of large pieces and lots of small pieces, for example, they're all going to cook at different frequencies. So you may have a soup where you've got a lot of pieces that are, a little bit crunchy and some pieces that are really soft. So you want to just try to cut them to similar sizes. Of course, as similar as you can, right? Don't go crazy trying to cut them super perfect. I'm cutting these in half again, trying to get them to all be fairly similar in size. Perfect. And then last one. And then same thing, just gonna turn it, chop it. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a little bit of olive oil into our heating pan. And then we're actually going to put in most of our vegetables. So we're gonna put in the onion, the sweet potato, the leek, some garlic, and actually a little bit of sun-dried tomato as well, which I love. Sun-dried tomato, and I feel like it's a very common pantry staple. A lot of us just like have sun-dried tomatoes on hand or a jar in the fridge that you used 2 years ago. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna pop these in, onions and leeks. Perfect. And then all of my sweet potato. It's a pretty big sweet potato. All right. And then I have my garlic, which I preemptively chopped, about 5 cloves of garlic. And it was 1 onion, 1 of the leek whites, 1 sweet potato, 5 cloves of garlic. And then the recipe calls for about 5 sun-dried tomatoes. I would say measure those with your heart. I love a sun-dried tomato, so maybe we'll take out a couple extra. These are in oil, so I'll take them out and I'll just kind of chop them up a little bit extra, just so that they're a little bit smaller. All right. Just give them a little chop. Perfect. And I'll pop these in with everything else. Then I'll give it all a good stir. We're just gonna let it cook for a bit until the sweet potato starts to soften. So could take 5 minutes, could take 10 minutes. Just kind of keeping your eye on them to see as they're softening. We will continue to cook it a little bit more. So knowing that if there's still a little bit of bite to them, that's okay. All right, so let me go ahead, give this a mix. If you have been on my cooking classes before, you know that I don't like dishes. So this is in fact the same spatula I used for my chili. It's all going to the same place. So, all right, I'll give this a good mix. I'm gonna pop in a little bit of salt and pepper too. Just to add a little bit of extra flavor in there. All right, so I've got some pepper. I'll crack some in there. And then just to sprinkle in some salt. And our timer is about to go off for our butternut squash in the oven. So that's perfect timing because we're just letting this sit. We're letting the sweet potatoes sit and cook too. So let's check in on how that's doing. All right, perfect. I'll leave that to cook. So let's check on our butternut squash in the oven. The apple and the onion look great. Let me show you what those look like. So you can see, like I mentioned, we want them to start browning. The lighting, whoa. But we want them to start browning on the edges. So they're definitely starting to do that, which is perfect. I'm just gonna pop them back in just for space saving purposes. And let me check on this butternut squash. So you want the butternut squash to be fork tender. Beautiful. Looks good to me. It's okay if you kind of cook them, let's say, and they're like really mushy. They're going to get blended anyway. So perfectly fine if you feel like you overcooked them. Better to do that than to undercook them. I'm going to turn the oven off because I do still have my apple and my onion in there. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to scoop this into my blender. Now, depending on how big your blender is, you may be able to do this all in one go. You may not. It's always a test in the moment to see if it all fits. It'll be helpful if you have it in smaller pieces versus larger pieces can be hard to all fit. I got the question last time, should you let the squash cool down before you blend it? You absolutely could. I have a nice high speed blender, and with that, it also has a vent on the top, meaning I can open it up so that as I blend something super hot, the steam can escape. Where you can get into a trap with heat and blending is if you have something that seals but has no chance of escape. Now you're saying or thinking, Aubrey, how do you know that? There was one time that in a small blender cup for a ninja like this, I was trying to make nut butter. So if you've ever made nut butter before, the nuts have to be hot to blend them. And I put the hot nuts into this tightly sealed blender cup, and the blender cup cracked open because there was just too much pressure from the heat. So if you only have an option for something completely sealed, that is when I would say, make sure that you wait until it cools down. If you can vent, more than welcome to go ahead and blend it while it's hot. So I'm actually, for space purposes, I'm just gonna put this back into the oven.
So there's also a question, Aubrey, from Karen on whether she can use an immersion blender.
Absolutely. That would be great if, for example, your blender isn't big enough. I would pop it into just like a big bowl or a pot, and then you could use an immersion blender. I do like blending it because I feel like it makes it like a little bit creamier, but I think an immersion blender is a great option too. All right, so as you can see, venting it. Don't want an explosion to happen. So I'm going to go ahead. This is just the butternut squash. I'm going to go ahead and blend. And let me put some of this down. Oops. Just to try to get it in there a bit more. Get everything blended. We are going to add some broth, some seasoning, the apples, the onions. So if this is just a preliminary blend and it doesn't get super smooth, do not worry whatsoever. Perfect. All right. See, I could sit here and blend it all day because I do love a nice thin soup, but I definitely won't make you all sit and watch that. I'm just going to go ahead and give the sweet potatoes a stir, see how they're looking. Looking pretty good. Definitely still need some more time. I can tell that the onions and leeks are starting to cook. They're starting to become more translucent, losing a little bit of their liquid. All right. So while that finishes and continues to cook, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the apples and the onions out, and I'm going to add those to my blender. All right. I'm just going to go ahead, scoop them in. And remember, we already seasoned this stuff a bit, but we're going to add some more seasoning. But I think it's important to remember, especially when it comes to salt and pepper, we've already put salt and pepper on it. So I would definitely try it before you go ahead and just add some salt and pepper into it. So with this, I'm going to put in a few different seasonings. I'm going to put in some nutmeg, about a half a teaspoon. I'm going to put in some paprika, about a half a teaspoon. I'm going to put in a quarter teaspoon of ginger, quarter teaspoon of sage, and then optional, about a quarter teaspoon of cayenne. I swear I'm not crazy and love heat that much. There's just barely any in here. So I'm going to just pour that in there. And I'm going to put in, you want to put in about like 4 to 6 cups of broth, but for the sake of my blender and size, we're just going to start by kind of pouring a little bit in, giving it a blend, and then giving it this chance to maybe add some more in there. It's also very flexible. If you like a thicker soup, definitely put less than 4 cups. I might be able to fit the rest of this in here. Perfect. It's right up to my 72-ounce line, which is fantastic. And that's 4 cups of broth. If you want it to be thinner, add some more broth. All right, so I'm going to vent it. I'm going to go ahead, blend.
There was a question earlier, Aubrey, as well, on whether you have to leave the apple skins on.
So I left the skins on. You could take them off. I am seeing that's kind of I feel like that's probably one of the things that takes the longest to blend is the apple skins, but you could absolutely peel them in advance, especially if you want it to blend a little smoother. I don't mind a little chunk here and there. So like I do see a couple pieces of apple skin. I'll probably blend it for a little bit more before we finish it and serve it. But otherwise, it'll just blend up really well into the soup if you can kind of leave it blending for a while. So I'm heading back over to our Marry Me Tuscan vegetable soup just for a second, because I think we're ready for the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and put some seasoning in and just cook it until it's kind of aromatic. So I'm going to put in about a tablespoon of paprika. Again, we're using paprika for all these recipes. So a tablespoon of parsley. And then I'm going to put in like about a teaspoon or so of thyme. And then I'm just going to let this kind of become fragrant. I'm also going to put in a tablespoon of tomato paste. I got the wonderful question last time of how do you save tomato paste? Because I feel like we need 1 tablespoon and then we never ever need it again. And so my thought or recommendation was if you've got a lot of extra, what you can do is you can save it in an ice cube mold, which an ice cube is about a tablespoon. And then you've got individual 1 tablespoon portions of your tomato paste. Someone else said at their store they sell squeezy tubes of tomato paste. I can't say I've seen that at my store. However, they definitely exist, and that would be a great way to like save, reduce, reuse. Also, sometimes what I'll do is I'll take it and I'll put it in a Tupperware, and then you just try to plan another meal that might use it. I feel like it's really easy to kind of integrate into a lot of different dishes. So something that you could definitely, put into a lot of different things. All right, so now I'm going to put in 5 cups of vegetable stock. So one of these containers is 4. I'm going to go ahead and put the whole thing in. And again, this is just vegetable stock, generic vegetable stock. You could use chicken stock. You could use bone broth. You could use your homemade stock. You could use water if you want to. I'm going to put 1 more cup. All right, perfect. And then we're going to add in our chickpeas as well. So I have a can of drained and rinsed chickpeas. So I'm going to put that in and put the chickpeas in. This is the part where we're kind of melding a lot of flavors. So I was talking to Gail before class about how, conceptually I love soups, but soups often do take a little while to cook. So for some of these, we're ebbing and flowing some of the times for cooking. I think it's always better if you can give a soup a little bit more time to marinate and meld those flavors together. But for the sake of this class, what we're going to do, we're going to bring this up to a boil. And we're just going to kind of let these flavors sit together for a moment. And then we're actually going to add in what I find to be the fun part, which is the gnocchi. So while that comes to a boil, I'll talk about, I have just regular, this is mini gnocchi. So let me see if I can, they're teeny tiny. It's great for something like a soup. I've also seen cauliflower gnocchi. I've seen whole wheat gnocchi. You could also omit it. You could use a different grain or starch, right? You could use sweet potatoes and potatoes. You could use farro. You could use quinoa. I think there are so many different options, or just leaving it out altogether. Marry me chicken is typically the recipe that we're kind of trying to emulate right now. So the chickpeas and the gnocchi kind of do the job of replacing that chicken. It's like a creamy sun-dried tomato chicken dish. And so in this, we're making some lighter adjustments. And so you could do so with the gnocchi, or the gnocchi could be that decadent, indulgent part. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to pour in my gnocchi. You want the gnocchi to cook through, and typically what that means is it'll start to float to the top. So right now it's kind of sinking to the bottom, and we'll know it's cooked when they all start to float a bit. Again, you could definitely, I would say, give the chickpeas and those other flavors some more time to meld together if you want before you put the gnocchi in. The gnocchi is kind of just our finishing agent. We're going to put in a couple other ingredients too. Come back to our squash soup, just give it a little pulse, and then I'll show you what it looks like. All right, and any questions while I'm serving this up? Right. So
any suggested substitutions for the chickpeas? Because my husband won't eat those.
Ooh, good question. Say any beans. Does he like any beans, or just like no beans at all?
He'll eat beans, just anti-chickpea for some reason.
I feel like white beans would be good, like a cannellini bean would be a good substitute, or like a kidney bean. I don't love kidney beans, but like a kidney bean would be a nice firm alternative too.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so this, I did realize last time that it is so hard to show the soups because they're in a bowl, so I can't tilt them sideways. But this is our sheet pan squash soup. Let me just like fill it up even more, and then you'll be able to see it. Now you can top it with a squeeze of lemon juice. You can top it with some pepitas, some pumpkin seeds. After we're done, what I'll do is I'll turn the camera a little bit so you guys can see all of them. But you can see it's like a nice smooth consistency. It's got a really nice texture to it. You could thin it out. You could leave it a little bit thicker. That's what I love about this, because I feel like it is so flexible to make it more of what you prefer. So let me check on the gnocchi over here. Still sinking. We'll give them a few more minutes. I'll serve up.
This is my chili. I started it a little bit early and I'm hungry.
Ooh.
So here's my chili, and I put mozzarella cheese on it.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah.
So Deborah is enjoying some delicious chili. So please eat, enjoy it. Wonderful. All right, so let me plate up my chili. So I will turn the heat off here. I have so many things on my stovetop. Got to make sure I turn the right thing off. All right, I'll get a ladle. The one thing about enameled cast iron and cast iron in general, it gets quite hot. So make sure you are using an oven mitt to take that lid off. I don't want anybody to burn their fingers. And I have a trivet over there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, take a couple ladlefuls. Beautiful. I feel like I added just the right amount of stock in this one. And I'm going to actually serve it with a little bit of cilantro on top. So let me get this out of the way. And let me grab a little bit of fresh cilantro from the fridge. All right. So let's put a couple little sprigs on top just for fun. You could also, I think what would be really nice is if you mix in some fresh cilantro at the end. I always recommend fresh herbs in a soup kind of at the end, because I feel like then it keeps their integrity. Beautiful. All right, that is our red lentil chili. I'll give you guys a little closer look. Here's our red lentil chili. Again, the soup, it's hard to show from the side. I gotta get some clear bowls for next time. All right, and last is our Marry Me Tuscan vegetable soup. Let me give it one final stir. Our gnocchis are starting to float. So what I'm gonna do to finish her off, I'm gonna put in a can of coconut milk. So I've got my coconut milk here. I like to leave the lid on. I usually take the lid off of everything, but I leave it on so I can give it a good shake. I'll pour that in. And then we're going to put in some lemon juice and some kale. So I'll bring this back around to chop up the lemon. I'll just slice it in half. I'm going to take about half the lemon, put the juice in. And then the kale, I'm just going to, you want about a handful. So I have this beautiful kale here. You've probably seen it in the corner. The crazy thing is, it was honestly quite wilted earlier, and I put it in this bowl. I chopped the bottom off and I put it in a bowl of water, and it is firm, crisp kale. So it really got saturated with that water. That's a tip if you ever end up with like a little bit of like limp greens. You can always rehydrate them by putting them in a bowl with some water. All right, so I'm just kind of chopping away from the stems here, especially with a soup. I don't want the big, thick stems. All right, and so then I'm just going to give it a like rough little chop. It'll start to wilt, so if your pieces are a little bit big, that's okay. What I like to do to chop greens, I kind of push them all up into a ball in my fist, and then I'll just give them a nice chop. Perfect. And I'll pop these into the soup. All right, and I'll give it one final stir, let it wilt up together, and then we'll give it a serve. All right, let me grab a bowl. And I'll rinse this off.
I still have
And we'll go.
sorry, I still have maple syrup out. Is that supposed to go in this soup as well?
You can add a little bit of maple syrup for a little bit of extra sweetness. Optional. I'm gonna have it kind of as is right now, but it's definitely an optional finisher for sure. So I'm gonna serve this up. Beautiful. A little messy, but still beautiful. All right, so we have this nice and creamy, turn the heat off here, Tuscan vegetable soup. You can see it's nice and orange with the creamy color. I will turn the camera to show you guys all at the end, but let me also show you what the broth looks like. So as you remember, it was just water that we mixed in there. And now our broth has been cooking for near an hour. Looks like it's starting to get a nice yellowy color to it. So let me serve some of this up. I can smell this fresh parsley in here. So kind of difficult to see. However, I feel like it's not a good example, but our broth is near done. It turns a nice yellowy, almost orangey color. Again, the longer you can give it, the better. However, I would say 1 to 2 hours is a pretty good amount to make sure that you're infusing all those flavors. So that's our bonus recipe. We have our red lentil chili. We have our Marry Me Tuscan vegetable soup. And we have our sheet pan squash soup. And those are our 3 recipes for our soup season cooking class. So I hope, Deborah, that your soups are delicious, and I hope you're enjoying your chili. Does anybody have any questions on any of the recipes? All right. Well, if no questions, then thank you everybody for coming tonight. That is it. Those are our recipes. You can find all of our recipes at uniteforher.org/food4thought. That's where all of our cooking class information is. Don't forget, my colleague Michelle is hosting Celebrate the Sides cooking classes in December. She's already done with her 2 in November, but you can come back, learn about some of her favorite holiday side dishes and how to lighten them up. And I hope to see everybody on a cooking class soon. But otherwise, have a happy Thanksgiving, a happy holiday season, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.
Same to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Gail.
Thanks, Aubrey. Looks awesome.
I wish I was in the office tomorrow. I would bring it
Quite
to
hungry
you,
for dinner now.
All right, well, enjoy your dinner. Bye, everybody.